Hey everybody, it's Jason with Parallel Reality coming back with you today with an article from The Federalist dated June 11th, and I apologize ahead of time. I kind of have the hiccups. I'm going to try to suppress them as much as possible while I'm going through this. But the article is called Fidel Castro Acolyte Karen Bass is no stranger to orchestrating organized chaos. And like I said in some of the videos earlier this week, that someone's a communist, and I didn't say this, but she's a trained communist, and you're about to find out exactly what she's done. Since Bass believes that the use of taxpayer dollars to deploy the National Guard and Marines to Los Angeles to protect the city and its citizens, as well as federal law enforcement, is shameful and despicable. Well, sorry, Mayor Bass, that they're doing the job that you should be doing, but you're a communist, which means you're stupid, so what else can you expect? Says with riots, there we go, and looting destroying Los Angeles again, it is important to remember that the city's mayor, Karen Bass, reportedly led a radical Cuban communist cell that was part of a group responsible for radicalizing youth and organizing chaos. In the 1970s, when Bass was in her 20s, she led the Southern California cell of Cuban Venceremos Brigade, a Fidel Castro regime-linked organization and alleged terror groups started to subvert the United States and proliferate communism. I cannot talk today. I don't know what it is. We'll keep going, though. It says after working as a brigadista, Bass climbed the ranks to become an organizer, visiting Cuba every 6 months. That should have been she should have been on some sort of list back then for visiting Cuba as much as she did. It says the rioting, looting, destruction, firebombing, assaults on federal officers, waving the Mexican flag, burning the American flag, and the like in her city, deemed by Democrats and their friends in the corporate media as peaceful, coupled with the failure of state and local law enforcement to protect the citizens of Los Angeles, is far less surprising when put in the context of Bass's reported violent revolutionary sympathies. She actually let the cat out of the bag on CNN recently, admitting that Los Angeles has a rapid response network of agitators, adding, if they see ICE, they go out and they protest. And that is exactly what happened. But whether the rioters knew it or not, the instigating factor was not even deportations, as they claim, but rather ICE conducting law enforcement operations against drug traffickers, child abusers, robbers, human traffickers, assaulters, and those with a history of domestic violence, according to the Department of Homeland Security. So yeah, those are the people that you're protecting out there, Karen Bass, so you're not the good guy. Says even if they were just deportation raids, that would still be completely legitimate use of federal resources, particularly after, as Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth put it, 21 million illegals have crossed our border under the previous administration. But Bass's response to the law enforcement operation seems more intent on running an agitation psyop than simply wanting millions of illegals to stay in her city. And I am deeply angered by what has taken place. These tactics sow terror in our communities and disrupt basic principles of safety in our city, Bass said in a statement, which is obviously BS. It says, my office is in close coordination with immigrant rights community organizations. We will not stand for this. Well, because part of it annoys me when people don't, they either don't understand the words that they're using, the left using fascism to describe things that are very much not fascism, or they conflate things. They're just saying that this is against immigrants. It's not. It's against illegal immigrants, not undocumented migrants. It's illegal immigrants. Okay? These people should not be here. And you seem to be totally fine with that because you're a communist, which means you're dumb. It says DHS blamed Bass and other Democrats' rhetoric for violence against ICE agents, and that's probably correct. It says, make no mistake, Democrat politicians like Hakeem Jeffries, Mayor Wu of Boston, Tim Walz, and Mayor Bass of Los Angeles are contributing to the surge and assault of our ICE officers through the repeated vilification and demonization of ICE, DHS Assistant Secretary Tricia McLaughlin said. From comparisons to the modern-day Nazi Gestapo to glorifying rioters, the violent rhetoric of these sanctuary city politicians is beyond the pale, and this violence against ICE must end. Once again, I've completely forgotten how to talk, but we're just going to keep going. It says in a news conference, Bass essentially threatened more violence unless federal law enforcement stops in the city, as White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller said, adding, the mayor of LA is effectively saying the mob violence is caused by the mere presence of ICE in the city, and the violence against ICE will not stop unless federal law enforcement is withdrawn from the city. This is the definition of insurrection. Yes, it is, and probably at that point she should be arrested. As LA and California's leadership demand the right to illegally import unlimited foreigners into America, to control America's entire immigration policy by fiat, and if they are not permitted, or if not so permitted, they will allow mobs to target ICE with impunity. But organized violence appears to be a concept Bass is already familiar with. Despite denying that she was in a leadership role in her communist organization, because communists lie all the time about everything, so that's not surprising, says an October 1975 issue of the Daily World, a communist newspaper, described her as the leader of the Venceremos Brigade in Southern California. Part of the brigade's mission was to develop solidarity with the Cuban Revolution and the peoples of the Third World, promote and develop the political formation of the progressive forces in the U.S., and educate the U.S. movement to an anti-imperialist consciousness. Says the brigade targeted the most radical members of the American left and organized trips to Cuba for almost 50 years. Julie Nishaman, I doubt I'm saying that right, but there you go, an original organizer of the brigade, said that the trips would encourage participants to reflect on whether they were really making a contribution toward destroying American with a K, because she's an idiot. I know why they're doing that, but she's still an idiot. So really making a contribution toward destroying American imperialism and building a revolution in this country. Says on June 15, 2010, the CIA said of the organization, in the late 60s and early 70s, the WUO, the Venceremos Brigade, and similar New Left groups in the United States had extensive contacts with and support from the governments and intelligence services of the Soviet Union, Cuba, North Vietnam, Communist China, and some East European Soviet satellites, so otherwise known as our enemies. And, kind of the worst places on Earth. Says in 1972, investigator Dwight Cruz testified that those entering the brigade were required to profess that they are Marxist-Leninist, submit to 14 weeks of twice-per-week indoctrination sessions, and fill out a detailed application in order to obtain membership. Bass posted a picture of her first trip to Cuba in 1973 to commemorate her visit with former President Barack Obama in 2016, and, well, there's a picture of it. Says the March post preceded Castro's eventual November 2016 death, for which Bass issued a press release honoring and affectionately referring to the dictator, stating, as Cuba begins, forgotten how to talk, as Cuba begins 9 days of mourning, I wish to express my condolences to the Cuban people and the family of Fidel Castro. The passing of the Comandante El Jefe is a great loss to the people of Cuba. No, it's actually the best thing that probably could have happened to them, to be perfectly honest. But here, standing for, communist dictators is Karen Bass's thing, apparently. Says Bass has also admitted to traveling to see Castro speak on multiple occasions and called him extremely charismatic. Says the Rapid Response Network to which Bass referred on CNN is partially run by the far-left American Civil Liberties Union, or ACLU, of Southern California, which encourages reporting ICE activity to the local networks within the organization. And as if I didn't need a reason to hate the ACLU more, well, I guess I found another one. Says one of those local networks is the Coalition for Humane Immigrant Rights, or CHIRLA, which I've brought up in previous videos, which received tens of millions of dollars from the Biden administration and is an agitator group in Southern California, according to the New York Post. CHIRLA was behind anti-ICE protests last week and has seen an increase in funding from the state of California, having received $34 million from the government in 2023, more than doubling the $12 million it received in 2022. Gee, why are they doing that? And remember, they're getting your taxpayer money to be able to do this. So CHIRLA denied having any connection to the current violence in Los Angeles. Of course they're going to say they didn't, otherwise they'd be investigated and shut down. It says despite admitting to having organized a press event and rally to protest the actions, and the fact that the riots last week were in direct response to ICE arresting violent criminals. They said, we have not participated, coordinated, or been part of the protest being registered in Los Angeles, other than the press conference and rally cited above, a CHIRLA spokesman told the Post. As Vice President J.D. Vance put it, undercutting the Governor Gavin Newsom's narrative that none of the violence was happening before the federal government became involved, which was obvious bull, says Newsom and his stooge, Karen Bass, fomented and encouraged the riots because their entire political movement exists for one purpose, to promote mass migration into the country. It is their reason for being. And here's a J.D. Vance thing, tweet, and I'm just going to read the first part here because we already read the second part just above. It says Newsom says he didn't have a problem until Trump got involved. Both of these photos were taken before the president authorized the National Guard to go protect our border patrol in California. This look like no problem. Then he was responding to Newsom, basically responding to him, and Newsom, of course, is going to spin it anyway to make himself look good because the man's a psychopath. It is unclear if Bass is using her communist organizing ties to inform the rioters in the city she is supposed to govern, but the rioters themselves do appear to be quite organized and totally inorganic. The inorganic nature of the riots is displayed even in the details of the shields, which in some cases involve a labor-intense process to make plywood with handles that look like cardboard protest signs that have been seen in the 2020 George Floyd riots and the 2024 pro-Palestine protests. Organizing groups reportedly hand out protective gear and other equipment to the supposedly organic rioters for them to use during the violence. There was one dude that was just picked up that they identified him from handing out like face masks, like professional face masks to people. So, well, that's a start. So the protests also appear calculated to put responders into the violence in what is called a decision dilemma, where law enforcement is forced to either negotiate and meet demands or react with force. It says blockading, taking over buildings, or putting themselves and others at risk are actions protesters use to evoke a reaction from authorities that make it seem like the rioters are innocent on camera, particularly by positioning sympathetic-seeming rioters in positions to undergo a high-visibility arrest. Such tactics might include drawing attention to the elderly, or bringing a baby to a riot, or platforming persons from certain ethnic groups that might not normally be associated with the event. For example, a white person being arrested at a Black Lives Matter riot might make an observer believe this is a widespread movement for justice. And Vocal Distance, which is another good Twitter account you should follow. Just a bunch of embedded tweets there, so we're going to skip over that because the article kind of talked about some of that stuff in different words already, but continuing on because we're almost done, got 3 more paragraphs. It says the organized rioters are able to create maximum unrest and damage because they are allegedly so well funded, potentially by groups like Churla, an organization that was getting grant funding from the Biden administration in the state of California. Without a sense of irony, Bass believes that the use of taxpayer dollars to deploy the National Guard and Marines to Los Angeles to protect the city and its citizens, as well as federal law enforcement executing immigration law, is shameful and despicable. They're going there again because you're not doing your job. Says maybe that's because she's asking herself if she is really making a contribution toward destroying American, with a K, imperialism and building a revolution in this country. Yeah, so Karen Bass, you are very much the bad guy in the situation. You and Gavin Newsom. And, got a communist in your midst, and, LA, what are you going to do about it? She's destroying your city, and she doesn't care. So let me know what you think about this in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.